Blood trickled down Daisy Cole's arm as she fought to stay upright on her horse, the distant silhouette of Silver Creek growing hazier with each passing minute. The spring of 1876 had brought more than just wildflowers to the Montana territory. It had brought a bullet with her name on it. Clutching her wounded shoulder, she urged her exhausted mare forward, knowing that if she stopped now, the men who'd ambushed her supply wagon would finish what they'd started. "Just a little farther, Willow," she whispered to the paint mare beneath her, whose once white patches were now splattered with crimson. "Don't you dare give up on me now." The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the open plains. Daisy had been traveling for hours, having abandoned her wagon after the attack. The supplies she'd spent her last dollars on were gone, stolen by the masked bandits who'd left her for dead after she'd managed to escape into the tall grass. Now, as night approached and her strength ebbed away with each drop of blood, Daisy feared she'd made a terrible mistake leaving the main trail. A light flickered in the distance, a lantern or perhaps a campfire. Daisy squinted, fighting the dizziness that threatened to pull her from the saddle. It might be her only chance. With the last of her strength, she steered Willow toward the light, praying it wasn't the same men who'd attacked her. When she reached the small homestead, her vision had narrowed to a pinprick of light. The modest cabin stood solitary against the darkening sky, smoke curling from its chimney. Daisy tried to call out, but her voice failed her. As she slipped from the saddle, the world tilted sideways, and the hard-packed earth rose up to meet her. The last thing she remembered was the sound of boots pounding across dirt and a man's voice, rough yet urgent. "Good Lord, miss, what's happened to you?" Then darkness claimed her. Colton Quinn had been a lot of things in his 30 years cowhand, trail guide, occasional bounty hunter, but a nursemaid had never been among them. Yet here he was, pressing a cool cloth to the forehead of a woman who'd collapsed outside his cabin 3 nights ago with a bullet hole in her shoulder, and a fever that threatened to cook her from the inside out. "Come on now," he murmured, wringing out the cloth again in the basin of water mixed with willow bark. "You've made it this far. Don't quit on me now." The woman Daisy, he'd learned from the letters in her saddlebag, hadn't regained consciousness since he'd carried her inside. He'd extracted the bullet, cleaned and dressed the wound as best he could, but infection had set in quickly, turning the skin around the entry point an angry red that spread in tendrils across her pale shoulder. Colton had sent his ranch hand, Miguel, riding hard for Doc Willis in Silver Creek. But the doctor was away delivering babies at a homestead 20 miles in the opposite direction. Miguel had returned with only some medicine the doctor's wife had provided, along with instructions that did little to ease Colton's worry. "You'll have to keep her cool," Miguel had relayed, "and pray the fever breaks before it takes her." That had been 2 days ago. Miguel had returned to the main ranch to tend to the cattle, leaving Colton alone with the unconscious woman who'd literally fallen at his feet. As the evening shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Colton studied Daisy's face. Even ravaged by fever, he could see she was beautiful high cheekbones, a scattering of freckles across her nose, and auburn hair that spilled across his pillow like liquid copper. What had she been doing out here alone? The silver locket around her neck had a small portrait inside an older couple, perhaps her parents. No husband, at least none that he could discern. When her fever spiked again near midnight, he pulled his chair closer to the bed and took her hand. "Listen here, Miss Cole," he said firmly, as if she could hear him through the fog of her illness. "I've put too much work into keeping you alive for you to up and die on me. So you're going to fight this, you hear me?" To his surprise, her fingers twitched in his, the barest flicker of response. Colton felt a surge of hope, foolish though it might be. He hadn't held a woman's hand in years, not since Ellen had left him for that banker from Helena. He'd sworn off attachments after that, burying himself in building his small cattle operation and the solitude of the Montana wilderness. Yet here he was, clutching a stranger's hand like a lifeline, though whose lifeline he couldn't rightly say. "Tell me a story," came a raspy whisper, so faint Colton nearly missed it. He started, looking down to find Daisy's eyes open to slits, glassy with fever but focused on his face. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding through him. Not sure about that, she managed, each word clearly costing her. Everything's spinning. Are you real? Colton squeezed her hand gently. Real as the ground beneath us, madam. My name's Colton Quinn. You collapsed outside my place 3 nights ago. You've been fighting a nasty fever since then. She closed her eyes, seeming to process this information. The men who shot me, no sign of them, Colton assured her. Your horse is safe in my stable. I'm afraid your supplies were gone, though. A tear slipped from beneath her closed eyelid. Everything, gone, all my money. Don't fret about that now, Colton said, reaching to wipe the tear away without thinking. First order of business is getting you well, the rest can wait. Her eyes flickered open again. The story, please. Need to stay here, not drift. Colton understood then. She needed an anchor, something to focus on besides the pain and fever. He cleared his throat, unused to speaking at length to anyone besides his horses and cattle. Well, let's see. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I suppose I could tell you how I ended up out here. Would that do? She gave a small nod, her eyes drifting closed again, though he could tell she was listening. I came west after the war fought for the Union, though that doesn't mean much out here. Worked cattle drives up from Texas for a few years before I won this parcel of land in a poker game in Silver Creek. Previous owner had given up after a hard winter killed half his stock. Most thought I was a fool to take it. He paused to adjust the cloth on her forehead. Maybe I was. First year was brutal. Built this cabin with my own hands. Lost more cattle than I care to remember to wolves and a blizzard that lasted 2 weeks. Considered giving up more than once. Daisy's breathing had steadied somewhat, though heat still radiated from her skin. What changed? She whispered. Colton smiled slightly. Spring came. Always does eventually. The hills turned green, calves were born, and I realized I'd survived. Sometimes that's enough of a victory. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. No, something about survival. I expect you do, he said quietly. Now rest. I'll be right here. As Daisy drifted back into unconsciousness, Colton settled deeper into his chair, still holding her hand. He'd meant what he said. He would be right there. He owed her that much, this stranger who'd fought so hard to reach his door. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, but inside the cabin, a vigil had begun that would stretch through days of uncertainty, whispered stories, and slowly kindling hope. By the 4th day, Colton had established a routine. Each morning, he'd step outside briefly to check on the horses and cattle in the nearest pasture, leaving the door open so he could hear if Daisy called out. He'd haul fresh water from the well, prepare simple broths from his dwindling supplies, and attempt to coax spoonfuls between her cracked lips whenever she surfaced from delirium. In the brief periods when Daisy was lucid, he learned fragments of her story. She was 24, the daughter of settlers who'd established a small mercantile in Silver Creek before dying from influenza 2 winters past. She'd been running the store alone since then, fighting against creditors and competitors who believed a woman couldn't handle business affairs. The supplies, in my wagon, she explained during one moment of clarity, her voice still weak but clearer than before. Last chance to save the store, used everything I had left to buy them from wholesalers in Helena. Those men who attacked you, any idea who they were? Colton asked, helping her take another sip of broth. Daisy's hand trembled as she pushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. Harrison Bennett, most likely, owns the big general store across town. Been trying to force me out for months. Can't prove it was his men, though. Colton's jaw tightened. He'd had dealings with Bennett before the man had tried to shortchange him on cattle feed last winter. That's a serious accusation. Dying tends to make one direct, she replied, a flash of spirit in her fever-bright eyes. Despite himself, Colton smiled. You're not dying, not on my watch. Such confidence, Mr. Quinn. Colton, he corrected gently. After pulling a bullet from your shoulder and watching you sweat through my only spare sheets, I think we're past formalities. A hint of color that wasn't from fever touched her cheeks. Colton then, and I'm Daisy. I know, he admitted. I checked your saddlebags for identification. Hope you don't mind. Under the circumstances, I suppose I can forgive the invasion of privacy. Her attempt at lightness faltered as a spasm of pain crossed her face, and she pressed a hand to her bandaged shoulder. Colton immediately reached for the willow bark mixture. It's time for more medicine. As he helped her drink the bitter liquid, his fingers brushed against hers, and for a moment, their eyes met over the rim of the cup. Something passed between them, a current of understanding or perhaps something deeper that neither was ready to acknowledge. The moment broke when Daisy began to cough, wincing as the movement jarred her wound. Colton supported her until the spasm passed, then eased her back against the pillows. "You should rest now," he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "You should too," she countered, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "Have you slept at all?" he shrugged. "I've gone longer without sleep on cattle drives." "This isn't a cattle drive, and I'm not a stray calf," Daisy said, her eyes already growing heavy as the medicine began to work. "There's room." She patted the far side of the bed weakly. Colton felt heat rise to his face. That wouldn't be proper. A faint smile touched her lips as she drifted towards sleep. "Nothing proper about any of this, Colton Quinn, but you're a gentleman all the same." After she fell asleep, Colton stood watching her for a long moment. The fever still had her in its grip, though not as fiercely as before. He touched his palm to her forehead, allowing his hand to linger perhaps longer than necessary. "You're a remarkable woman, Daisy Cole," he murmured to the quiet room. Then he returned to his chair, leaned his head back against the wall, and allowed himself to close his eyes just for a moment. He dreamed of copper hair spread across his pillow and a mercantile store with both their names above the door. The fifth day brought rain, a steady, soaking downpour that drummed against the cabin roof and turned the yard to mud. Inside, Daisy's fever raged higher than ever, pushing her deep into delirium. She thrashed against the bedding, calling out for people Colton didn't know, begging unseen assailants to leave her alone. Colton worked tirelessly, applying cold compresses, changing sweat-soaked sheets, and speaking calm reassurances even when he wasn't sure she could hear him. By midday, he was exhausted and growing desperate. The medicines from Doc Willis's wife seemed to have little effect, and Daisy's breathing had become shallow and rapid. When Miguel arrived with supplies in the afternoon, drenched from his ride, he found Colton haggard and hollow-eyed. "Patron, you look worse than she does," the ranch hand said bluntly, setting down the sack of provisions. "The doctor, still away," Colton said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Did you bring the extra medicines I asked for?" Miguel nodded, pulling several packets from his coat. His wife prepared them fresh. She also sent this. He produced a small bottle of dark liquid. "Laudanum, for the pain," and she said to try this. He handed over a small pouch. "Fever root. Make a tea as strong as you can. It tastes terrible but might break the fever." "Thank God for that woman," Colton muttered, taking the medicines. "Can you stay? I could use another pair of hands." Miguel glanced at the bed where Daisy lay muttering incoherently, her face flushed. "Of course. What do you need me to do?" For the next several hours, they worked together, Miguel building up the fire and preparing the fever root tea while Colton continued his vigil beside Daisy. When it came time to administer the bitter brew, Colton lifted Daisy's head gently. "Daisy, I need you to drink this," he said firmly. "It's medicine that will help." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed. "Father, is that you?" Colton exchanged a worried glance with Miguel. "It's Colton, Daisy. You're at my cabin, remember? So cold," she murmured, though her skin burned to the touch. "The river, too deep." "Just drink, Querida," Miguel encouraged from behind Colton. "Small sips." Together they managed to get most of the tea into her, though she fought weakly against them at times. When she finally subsided into restless sleep, Miguel insisted Colton eat something. "You cannot help her if you collapse yourself," he reasoned, pushing a plate of beans and salt pork toward his employer. Colton ate mechanically, his eyes never leaving Daisy's face. "I've seen fevers before, Miguel. Never one that held on this long." "She is strong," Miguel said, studying the woman thoughtfully. "You can see it in her face. A fighter." "Yes," Colton agreed softly. "She is that." Miguel watched his boss for a long moment. "You care for this woman." It wasn't a question. Colton didn't bother denying it. "Doesn't matter what I feel. What matters is getting her well." "Perhaps," Miguel said, "but I have worked for you 5 years, Patron, and never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." He stood, gathering his rain-soaked hat and coat. I will return tomorrow with more supplies. Try to sleep, even if just for an hour. After Miguel left, Colton resumed his position beside the bed. The rain continued its steady rhythm, oddly soothing after the tension of the day. He took Daisy's hand between both of his own, alarmed at how delicate it felt, how fragile. "Listen to me, Daisy Cole," he said quietly but intensely. "I know you're fighting and I know you're tired, but I need you to keep fighting. I've only just met you and I'm not ready to say goodbye." He swallowed hard, surprised by the emotion thickening his voice. I think I could love you given the chance, and I'd like that chance. So you hold on. You beat this fever and I promise you won't have to fight alone anymore." Outside, the rain began to slacken and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled a storm passing, moving on to trouble other skies. Inside the cabin, Colton kept his vigil, whispering stories, promises, and finally prayers into the quiet night. Near dawn, Daisy's fever broke. The first thing Daisy became aware of was the absence of fire beneath her skin. For so long, she'd been burning from the inside out, trapped in a landscape of heat and disjointed nightmares. Now she felt almost cool, the sheets beneath her damp but no longer soaked with sweat. The second thing she noticed was the weight against the edge of the bed. Opening her eyes required monumental effort, but when she managed it, she found Colton slumped forward in his chair, his upper body resting on the mattress beside her hip, one of his hands still loosely clasping hers. He was deeply asleep, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen during her brief periods of lucidity. Daisy took the opportunity to study him properly. His brown hair fell across his forehead, in need of a trim. Several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. There were lines at the corners of his eyes, laugh lines. Her mother would have called them, though Daisy suspected they came more from squinting against the Montana sun than from mirth. He was handsome in a rugged way, nothing like the smooth-faced, pomaded men who'd courted her half-heartedly in Silver Creek. More importantly, he'd saved her life. Had stayed by her side through what must have been days of illness, when most would have dumped her at the doctor's door or left her to fate. She tried to shift position, wincing as pain flared in her shoulder. The small movement was enough to wake Colton, who jerked upright, instantly alert, his hand tightening on hers. "Daisy," he said, his voice rough with sleep. His eyes searched her face, and what he saw there made him break into a smile that transformed his entire countenance. "Your fever's broken." "So it has," she replied, her own voice barely more than a whisper, her throat painfully dry. He immediately reached for a cup of water on the bedside table. "Here, small sips." As she drank, his free hand moved to her forehead, confirming what they both already knew. His touch lingered, gentle fingers brushing her hair back, the gesture intimate in a way that should have been presumptuous but somehow wasn't. "You had me worried," he said simply. Daisy handed the cup back. "How long was I out of my head?" 5 days, Colton answered. "Though you had some clear moments in between." "I remember some of it," she admitted. "You telling me stories, something about winning this land in a poker game." She attempted a smile. "Unless I dreamed that part." "No, that's real enough," he confirmed. "Though I might have embellished a bit about my poker skills." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of morning birds outside the window. Daisy became acutely aware that she was wearing only a thin chemise beneath the blankets, and that she was in this man's bed, with him looking at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fever. "I should thank you," she said finally. "For saving my life, for caring for me. It was far beyond what anyone would expect from a stranger." Colton's eyes held her steadily. "Don't feel like much of a stranger anymore." The simple honesty of his statement caught her off guard. "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose you don't." Before either could say more, a knock sounded at the door. Colton squeezed her hand once before standing to answer it. "That'll be Miguel with supplies," he explained, "and hopefully news from town." Miguel entered with his arms full of parcels and a broad smile when he saw Daisy sitting up in bed. "Ah, La Señorita is awake and looking much better," he exclaimed. "This is good news indeed. Miguel's been helping me look after you," Colton explained. Best ranch hand and friend a man could ask for. The Mexican cowhand set down his burdens and made a small, respectful bow toward Daisy. "It is nothing. The patron has barely slept, barely eaten. He is the one who kept you in this world." Daisy felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Then I'm grateful to you both." Miguel's expression turned more serious as he handed Colton a folded newspaper. "There is news from Silver Creek. Not good, I'm afraid." Colton unfolded the paper, scanning the front page quickly, his jaw tightened visibly. "What is it?" Daisy asked, anxiety flaring in her chest. "Is it about my store?" Colton hesitated, then brought the paper to show her. The headline was stark and unambiguous. "Local mercantile destroyed in suspicious blaze." Daisy's fingers trembled as she took the paper, reading quickly through the article. According to witnesses, her store had caught fire 3 nights ago, the blaze spreading so quickly that despite the town's efforts, nothing could be saved. The marshal was investigating the possibility of arson. "Everything's gone," she whispered, the full weight of it sinking in. "The store, my home, my parents' legacy, all of it." Colton sat on the edge of the bed, his face grave. "There's more. Miguel, tell her what you heard in town." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "There is talk that you fled after setting the fire yourself, señorita, for the insurance money. Bennett is telling everyone you were in financial trouble." "That's absurd," Daisy exclaimed, then winced as the sudden movement sent pain through her shoulder. "I was here, shot and unconscious. How could I have? We know that," Colton said firmly, "but the town doesn't. And Bennett's making sure they believe the worst." Daisy closed her eyes, feeling the last of her strength ebbing away. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd fought to preserve after her parents' death gone in a single night of flames. And now her reputation was in ashes as well. "What will I do?" she asked, more to herself than to the men. "First, you'll get well," Colton said decisively. "Then we'll figure out the rest together." Daisy's eyes snapped open at the "we." "I can't ask you to get involved in my troubles. You've done more than enough already." "You're not asking, I'm offering." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "Bennett's had this coming for a long time. Half the small ranchers in the territory have grievances against him." Miguel nodded vigorously. "Es verdad, the man is, how do you say, a snake. But why would you help me?" Daisy pressed. "You barely know me." Something flickered in Colton's eyes, something warm and unexpected that made Daisy's breath catch. "I know enough," he said simply. Miguel, sensing the tension in the air, cleared his throat. "I will prepare some breakfast. The señorita needs to regain her strength." As he busied himself at the stove, Colton remained perched on the edge of the bed, studying Daisy with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead sent a different kind of warmth spreading through her. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly so that only she could hear. "We'll figure this out together. If you want to rebuild, I'll help you rebuild. If you want to start fresh somewhere else, I'll help with that too. But you're not alone in this, Daisy, not anymore." The simple sincerity of his offer brought tears to her eyes. For so long, she'd carried everything by herself: the store, her grief, the daily struggle to prove herself in a town that viewed a woman in business as an oddity at best, a target at worst. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. Colton's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Because in 5 days of sitting beside this bed, I've come to admire your strength. Because even delirious with fever, you fought. Because I think we might have something worth exploring here, you and I." He gave a self-deprecating smile. "Or maybe because I'm just a fool who believes in helping someone who needs it. Take your pick." Daisy caught his hand before he could withdraw it, holding it against her cheek for a moment. "Not a fool," she whispered. "A good man. The kind I'd started to believe didn't exist anymore." The look that passed between them then contained a promise unspoken but real of possibilities neither had anticipated when fate had brought Daisy bleeding to Colton's door. In the days that followed, Daisy's physical recovery progressed steadily. Her strength returned gradually, allowing her to move from the bed to a chair by the window, and eventually to take short walks outside the cabin with Colton's steadying arm around her waist. The wound in her shoulder healed cleanly thanks to Colton's careful tending, though she would carry the scar for life. As her body healed, so too did something in her spirit. The loss of her store remained a raw wound, but each day spent in the tranquility of Colton's homestead brought a measure of peace she hadn't known in years. The rhythms of ranch life, the dawn chorus of roosters, the distant lowing of cattle, the evening symphony of crickets and frogs worked their way into her consciousness, soothing the jagged edges of her grief. Colton, for his part, found himself reveling in Daisy's company. She was quick-witted and determined, with a practical intelligence that complemented his own straightforward nature. They talked for hours about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. He told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, the aimless years that followed until he found purpose in this patch of Montana wilderness. She shared stories of growing up in the mercantile, learning business at her father's knee, the struggle to keep the store afloat after her parents' deaths. 2 weeks after her fever broke, Doc Willis finally returned to Silver Creek and made the journey out to Colton's ranch. After examining Daisy thoroughly, he pronounced her on the road to full recovery, though he warned it would be some time before she regained her former strength. "You're a lucky woman, Miss Cole," the doctor said, repacking his bag. "Not many survive a gunshot wound and subsequent infection without proper medical care." He glanced at Colton with newfound respect. "You did well, Quinn. Might have a calling as a physician if ranching doesn't pan out." After the doctor left, Daisy and Colton sat on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. A companionable silence stretched between them, comfortable in a way Daisy would never have believed possible with a man she'd known for such a short time. "Doc Willis brought news from town," Colton said eventually. "Thought you should know the marshal's investigation found clear evidence of arson at your store. Coal oil splashed around the back door, distinctive boot prints leading away." Daisy's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "Bennett's men. Most likely, though proving it will be another matter." Colton turned to look at her directly. "The marshal also knows you're here now. I thought it best to clear your name regarding the fire accusations." "Thank you," Daisy said softly, "though I'm not sure what good it does. The store is still gone, and with it any means I had of supporting myself." Colton was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said finally. "About your future." Daisy tensed slightly. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing her convalescence couldn't continue indefinitely. Soon she would need to make decisions about where to go, what to do next. "I've been thinking," Colton continued, his voice careful, measured. "My ranch is doing well enough, but I've always wanted to expand the operation. Diversify. Maybe add a small trading post to serve the outlying homesteads. Save folks the trip all the way into Silver Creek." Daisy turned to him, surprised. "A trading post here," he nodded. "The stagecoach route passes just a mile south. With a little effort, we could divert some of that traffic this way." His eyes met hers, intent and serious. "It would need someone with experience in mercantile operations, of course, someone who knows stock and accounting, someone like you." "Are you offering me a job, Colton Quinn?" Daisy asked, not entirely sure whether to be grateful or offended. "No," he said simply. "I'm offering you a partnership." The word hung between them, weighted with implications beyond the merely commercial. "A partnership," she repeated carefully. "In every sense of the word," he confirmed, his voice dropping lower. "If you want it." Daisy's heart hammered against her ribs. "We've only known each other 3 weeks. I've known some folks 20 years and wouldn't trust them to water my horse," Colton countered. "Time isn't the only measure of knowing a person." He reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking for an answer today or tomorrow. Take all the time you need, but know this: you have a place here, Daisy Cole, whether as a business partner or something more." Daisy looked down at their joined hands, then out at the rolling landscape before them. The land was beautiful in the fading light, wild and challenging, but with a quiet strength that resonated within her. "I've never been one to make hasty decisions," she said slowly. "But I've also learned that sometimes, when an opportunity presents itself, hesitation only leads to regret." She turned back to him, really looking at him, this man who had pulled a bullet from her shoulder, who had sat beside her bed for days refusing to leave until her fever broke, who was now offering her not just a new beginning, but a place by his side. "I think," she said softly, "that a partnership could be the beginning of something extraordinary." The smile that broke across Colton's face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Daisy met him halfway, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held all the promise of new beginnings. When they separated, Colton kept her hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "There's something else you should know," he said, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I wasn't entirely forthcoming about how I acquired this land." Daisy raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the poker game was real enough," he admitted. "But what I didn't mention was that I had 4 queens in my hand. Seems like something of an omen now, doesn't it?" Daisy laughed a real laugh, the first since before her parents' deaths. "4 queens, Mr. Quinn, and here you are with just 1 coal." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The only one that matters," he said softly. As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, hands entwined, watching the first stars appear. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but rich with shared purpose and newfound love. The fever that had nearly claimed Daisy's life had broken, but something else had ignited in its place, something that would warm them both through all the seasons to come.